Welcome to the High Performance Hockey Podcast. Today we're joined by CEO of ALTIS, Stu McMillan, and Assistant Professor at the University of Calgary, Dr. Matt Jordan. Stu has worked with professional and amateur athletes in a variety of sports with a focus on power and speed development. He has personally coached more than 70 Olympians at 9 Olympic Games, winning over 30 Olympic medals. He has worked as a part of national governing bodies in 6 countries and has been part of and/or led integrated sports support teams in the United States, Canada, and the UK. Matt, Dr. Jordan holds a PhD in medical science and a master's in exercise physiology with a specialization in neuromuscular physiology. Matt's PhD research focused on return to sport neuromuscular monitoring for athletes with ACL injury. Matt has authored and co-authored several peer-reviewed articles and regularly presents at scientific conferences. I asked both Matt and Stu to get back on the podcast. They've been guests in the past. They've been mentors of mine from a distance. I've learned so much from them. My undergrad, believe it or not, was in business administration. I went back to get my master's degree and then onward as a 40-year-old to get my PhD in kinesiology. But I had so much educational gaps to fill, and their blog series entitled A Coach's Guide to Strength Development was absolutely epic at the time. This was written almost 10 years ago, so not, super long ago, but also not recently. But I still think it holds massive impact for old and younger coaches alike. We speak about the blog posts, we speak about advice for young practitioners, the strength and conditioning field in general. It's an unbelievable conversation. Welcome to the podcast. Gentlemen, welcome to the podcast.
Anthony, thanks so much for having us. It's great to be here.
Yeah, really good to be with you guys.
Guys, second time around. Thank you guys for your time in advance. I want to start by thanking both of you guys. I know this is the second time you guys have appeared here. I've coached now, and you guys have coached longer than I, but going on 25 years. And a lot of the information that I got post, traditional education routes has come from both of you, and it's had a profound impact on my programming, the way I view the complexity of how we interact on a daily basis, our environment, et cetera. So thank you guys, and really excited to kind of just have a casual conversation about life and training and some of the things that and those educational pieces that you shared with a lot of people, including your blog. So thank you guys right off the get-go. Let me start with you, Stu. Just curious, you just came back from the Cayman. Can you talk to us about what you've been doing at ALTIS the past several months?
Yeah, sure. We, as many of your listeners may know, we moved to Atlanta about 2.5 years ago. And what we found over the course of the first 2 years there was the winter was a little bit worse than what we had expected. It was quite cold actually here in the winter in Atlanta, and it's quite a lot of rain. So last year we were lucky enough to be able to go down to Grand Cayman for a few weeks and to get some warm weather training in. And we expanded that to 3 months this year. So yeah, I was there. We're super lucky. Like we had this great relationship with this hotel down there called Palm Heights. We were there for 3 months, January, February, and March. And I wanted to take advantage of that time to not only just work with the athletes that we had there. Obviously, this is an Olympic season, so it was really important that we get a good start to it. So that was obviously the main objective of just getting a good kickoff to the season, get some good warm weather training in for 3 months, but also being down there. We talked about this, and Matt and I have talked about this a lot. It's like at this point in our careers, when we've been doing this for so long, it's so much more about now just doing cool things. And, we say this a lot, just doing cool things with cool people in cool places. So we're in this cool place in Grand Cayman. How can we now bring some cool people down here and do some cool things together? So that's, the secondary reason why we were down there is I brought a bunch of my cool friends down, and we were shooting a lot of great, cool content. So look for that over the course of the next year or so as we start to release that. But that's sort of what I've been up to back in Atlanta now. As I said, this is Olympic season. I've got a group of 10 sprinters. Hopefully we can get as many of those qualified for Olympic Games as we possibly can.
Outstanding. Matt, your current appointment, your teaching duties right now, and your research interests, could you update the audience?
Yeah, I mean, in a nutshell, I took a university job in a few years ago, and it's been great because my position is a research-based position. So, I do teach, but it's only 3 courses over the whole year, 2 in the fall, 1 in the winter, and they're right up my alley. So the first course is a course on muscle mechanics and strength mechanics, looking at the physiology, biomechanics of muscle strength and power across the lifespan from injury, performance, and aging. I love that course because, it's amazing to see students today, and Stu would remember back when we used to run our practicum at the university. Students have so much more knowledge now because of social media, but there's all these gaps in like, actually, why am I doing this sort of gaps? Like it's hard to know what the physiology, biomechanics, how to explain this from a scientific perspective. So it's been a lot of fun to do that. The other course is a periodization course where we look at, the history of periodization and how that sort of evolves, and also talk about some application for, again, health and performance. And that sort of ties into some ideas that I think maybe we'll be talking about a little bit later today. Research-wise, what's been great is we are saddled up with the varsity athletics program. And so with my interest in looking at how muscle mechanics and strength are affected by ACL injury. When I was working with skiers, I was always limited because, they hurt themselves a lot, but we only have, let's say, 20 skiers on a team in any given year. And now what we're able to do is baseline test. I think last year we all had almost 300 athletes baseline tested before the season started, and we did a full battery of strength mechanics. So we looked at eccentric, concentric strength ratios on this really fancy robotic dynamometer we have, load velocity profiling on force plates, all sorts of jump and muscle mechanic testing. And yeah, now we follow them along, and we're doing some really cool work. And my grad students have been absolutely outstanding. It's been such a great transition to move from coaching to this because it feels very similar. But man, I just can't say enough about our grad students, Zach McLean, Nate Morris, Nathan Boone Van Mossel. There's some excellent people who've made this a great transition. So it's been a lot of fun.
Awesome. Really looking forward to asking you some more targeted questions, both of you. Okay, right off the get-go, educate the audience, including myself. Batman, Robin, Robin, Batman. How'd you guys meet? Like, you guys go back way back. So how did you guys first meet, and why do you guys feel that, I mean, to this day, you guys are on, you're talking amongst each other, you're giving each other, ripping each other barbs. How did it start?
Matt has a far better memory for these things. Partly because I'm a little bit older than Matt. So I'm gonna let Matt sort of speak to how I don't remember how we met. I know where we met. I don't know where. We were probably just kind of in and around the same place, in and around the same time. But how did we actually meet? Matt, do you remember kind of even the time period, mid to late 90s, mid 90s, early 90s?
Yeah. I mean, it's funny. I was actually touring yesterday. I do some work with the NBA. And, this is through Plantiga. We have a really cool opportunity with the NBA right now where we're sort of in their startup accelerator. So the NBA comes to Calgary, their scientific group, and they're meeting with other researchers, and then they grab some time with me. And I walked them down to the Olympic Oval at the University of Calgary, and I'm sort of explaining to them, I'm like, it doesn't look like much now. It's like this building is nearly, it's probably 40 years old. It doesn't look like it's that impressive, I guess. But I was like, you'd be amazed to have seen all the people and names that have come through this building. Vladimir Zatsiorsky was a postdoc and not a postdoc, but a visiting researcher at the lab. Charles Poliquin. You start going down the list of these international people that Stu and I would have known over the years. Anyways, it was a hotbed, and it was like this really cool environment that I don't think anybody planned, but it was off the back of the 1988 Olympics. And how Stu and I end up meeting is we get pulled into doing, again, work with our varsity teams and sort of establishing a little bit more of a presence around strength and conditioning. Stu was working with a group of athletes more in the track space. I was working with the Olympic speed skaters. We met and literally we hit it off. And it was like, it was a really cool time because just a really big social network of like-minded individuals emerged from those days. And, I look back, I feel very fortunate to have spent so much time with Stu, because, we have like endless stories of how maybe we would take a month off after the Olympic season and come back and converge. And, I'd be like, hey, I've been thinking about something. And, he'd say, I've been thinking about something too. And we'd compare notes. It's like, man, it's really similar. Like, holy cow. And we, be able to like really have a partner to discuss things and evolve things. That's kind of how this relationship started. And not to mention other stuff, love for coffee. We love to go for curry once a week. Stu got me super into jazz music and reggae. And I loved music, but my parents didn't listen to music. So Stu's rubbed off on me in a lot of ways. It's just been a good friend. And, I just feel lucky that, I still get to call him, every couple of weeks and catch up. So it's been a cool time together.
Yeah, it's been a long journey for sure. I do remember now. I think I was working at the fitness center at the University of Calgary, right? And I remember there was a notice board somewhere in the university that they're looking to recruit a strength and conditioning group for the University of Calgary teams, and I put my name in the hat, and I was turned down for it. I don't know if you remember that, Matt, but they said no to me. So they said yes to Nick Ward, who was there, and probably you and a few others, and Jody Hicks, who was the manager of the fitness center. And I think it was Tony Fasano and Jody who was putting together this group, and Tony was the head coach of the football team. And I was actually turned down. So I remember I had to go into Tony Fasano, the head football coach's office, and say, hey, I'm serious. I want to do this, eh? So it ended up being Matt and myself and Nick Ward and Jody and I think a couple others, and we just basically volunteered to be strength and conditioning coaches for the varsity teams, and that it just all sort of kicked off from there, didn't it? And as Matt said, it ended up being such a rich environment of just speaking of cool people doing cool things. I mean, I just remember back to those times, and there's a lot of cool people doing a lot of cool things in a really cool place at that time. So I look back at those years really, really fondly.
You said Pollock, Zorski. I know a lot of colleagues that have come out as well. Obviously, guys like Matt Price. Shared mentors that you guys have. Obviously, Dan Paff is huge, right? That you guys really. Who else do you share? It may be in Calgary, it may not be, but who else do you guys really value, or girls for that matter, that you guys share that common discourse with? Maybe it's weekly, maybe it's monthly. And maybe a better question to follow up is why? You guys have been around the game forever. So for you to be calling someone a mentor is a big deal to a lot of young coaches. So that's just out of curiosity.
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting question because before we even were aware, I think, of the importance of mentorship and having sort of somebody who's a little bit more experienced in the field mentoring younger people, I feel like we had a really, really rich peer mentorship group that was kind of led by myself and Matt, but others as well who were around at the time. And there was probably 4 to 6 of us, and we're all, as Matt was saying earlier, just bouncing ideas off of each other. And, it wasn't that difficult to find out what the good information was at the time, because there wasn't a lot of information out there. So it was all in the same sort of spaces, and say, oh, what do you think of this? What do you think of that? So on and so forth. We wouldn't get lost in the complexity that a similar group may now. So I think what was most important for us, at least early, was these peer mentorship relationships that we had together. And these times, just having conversations in the weight room, having conversations over curry. And Matt just said that as an aside, but that became that curry night that we had. We went for curry, Anthony, every Tuesday night for decades. Like, this wasn't just a thing that we would just go. Every Tuesday night we would go for, and it probably kept on. Well, I know it kept on going after I left, but it was up until the point where I left Calgary in 2010. It was every Tuesday night. And it would be, it was always Matt and myself, and often Scotty Ma and Nick Ward, and a lot of the other coaches around in the university at the time, and many of the athletes, and it's anywhere between sort of 5 and 6 of us, up to about 40 of us, would go for curry every single Tuesday. And these were just, again, super rich sort of learning environments where we just talk about all things, mostly about training, right? It was just, I feel like that influenced my thinking today more than any other sort of more traditional mentorship relationship. And as you said, my relationship with Dan Paff started in 1995. I think Matt and myself traveled down to Florida to meet Dan in 99 or 2000. So that's when I introduced Matt to Dan as well. And that became sort of a mentorship relationship that continues to this day between the two of them as well. Early days, it was sort of Jody Hicks and Tony who kind of started this thing for us, but we quite quickly sort of grew past their level of interest in it. And then obviously the people that were around at the time, like Dr. Steve Norris and those who had a little bit more of an academic sense to them, that Matt can speak to a little bit more than what I could.
Yeah, I mean, I won't belabor it, but I mean, I sometimes think as I've emerged and grown in my career, you start to get pulled into these leadership courses and culture, and oh my God, I don't know how many resources and books are there, that I've got filed away somewhere. And sometimes you're like, oh, how do I create this culture? How do I? And you start reflecting on it, and God dang, it seems hard. And then I look back to those days and I realized that we had been doing that, without even knowing it. Like this idea of getting all the athletes and all the strength coaches together every Tuesday night for curry, going to the same restaurant. We got to know the owner. We got to, we got to sit down and discuss training and laugh and have a good time. It was like, all I could say is that the relationships and that peer-to-peer mentorship was so important. And maybe that's something that, when your audience is listening to this, and, a lot of times you think about mentorship as having to come from somebody who's got more experience than you. It can also be somebody who's got different experience, and it can also come from just the people you surround yourself with. So, that I can't overstate that. It was a really crucial time. And, maybe the other thing I'll just add flavor to for what Stu's narrative was, because we had endless numbers of strength coaches, right? Like, I mean, we've just, Stu's naming a few names, but I go back to Charles, because everybody knows Charles. I mean, shit, like when I met Charles, I did not, he was extremely influential in helping us get a direction. Now, it doesn't mean that we agreed with everything, and doesn't mean that, we tried to emulate and follow everything, but what a fundamental influence in how we thought about strength development. So we had these people, but then the other component is we were at the university, and, I started to realize as I was getting out of my undergrad and getting into my master's, that if I went around the world to, let's say, a biomechanics conference or something, and I said, I'm from the Human Performance Laboratory at the University of Calgary, instantly, oh, wow, are you working with Ben O'Nig? The Dr. Ben O'Nig, the godfather of running shoe development. Are you working with Walter Herzog, pioneer in understanding muscle mechanics? Do you know Dr. Steve Norris, expert in altitude physiology? Like, it was really like, oh, wow, geez, I guess I'm in the presence of great minds. And, it's funny. I was just in Benno's office yesterday. He's almost 90. And he's still there, and he's still researching, and we were talking about one of my students' projects who's, this is how it evolves, right? Like, we've got 300 data points before before injury and over time. And my PhD student, Zach McLean, just presented this work at our HPL seminar. It's a hugely rich data set, because not only are we looking at mechanical measures, is we got all these psychosocial measures that are starting to bring context to people. And Benno says, you should really be thinking about machine learning for this. And of course we are. We've got some partnerships overseas with a really good machine learning expert overseas who's helping us. And Benno called me in his office yesterday to say, you got a really talented person here. You need to send this person overseas somewhere else so they can learn. And he's like, literally, he said, not that I can't help him, but you need to send him away, quote unquote. And so in this era where Stu and I are seeking mentorship, there was always this element of the science, people like that, the guidance. I got guidance yesterday from Benno. It's like, what a great mentor. We have these opportunities, so I can go to Stu and explain things that I've heard from Benno. And at the end of the day, those individuals were so influential in our ability to think about this from a scientific process. And, I reflected on that yesterday. I'm like, mentorship comes when you take a risk and you go out and you go travel around and you figure out new relationships. I mean, that was almost like a mandatory every year. Where are you going this year? I'm going to go visit this person. I'm going to go to this conference. I'm going to go travel here. I'm going to go invest for a couple of weeks and just go and shadow and see what I can pick up. That to me is, again, just as a thought on mentorship and where you find it and how you go about it. You don't have to necessarily pay for it. You just need to be sort of building it around your network. And then, like I said, it comes in funny places, but man, did we ever have some good mentors? And I just happened to have a great conversation with a mentor yesterday, Ben Onig, right? Just, giving me, and I didn't even ask for it, just giving me some good knowledge and good insight about how I can be better and do better research and understand, that my own mentorship of others in a better way. So it was a very cool place to be.
That was gold, guys, not just for young coaches, but for people that have done it before, just hearing your stories. And sometimes I'd argue, Matt, that you don't even know that you are a mentor. And I'll pivot right to what I mean by that. You guys on this call are mentors of mine from a distance you never even knew back in the day. 2015, this thing is, I'm not being funny. Like, this was like, what's the scene in the movie? How about them apples? Well, you know what I'm talking about? Like, what's the movie? Good Will Hunting, right? Like this blog that you guys wrote, and I know, Matt, you co-authored several of these sections. It is a mandatory read for every strength and conditioning intern or coach that walks in our gym. It is outstanding. And I know it's 2015. I'm looking at the first one, right? A Coach's Guide to Strength Development. Unbelievable. At that time, and I'm just going to tell you before I ask some more targeted questions, at that time, I was like, oh, geez, this is some interesting stuff. Okay. I love the physiology. Wow. Matt's digging really deep. And then probably the stuff that hit me on the head the most was complexity, periodization, the uncertainty in programming, loading schemes, complementary, like this stuff right now, 7 years later still has an impact. And by the way, in a sea of mostly noise, and I don't say that in a negative way, at least in circles on social media, this stuff is massive signal. So let me start by saying A Coach's Guide to Strength Development. Who got that idea? Was that over a curry? Like, what the hell happened there, boys?
Today's episode has been brought to you by Physical Preparation for Ice Hockey, Biological Principles and Practical Solutions, and the Gain Go Grow Manual. This is a 2-part book series exploring training the intermediate and advanced level players. Book number 1 explores training the intermediate player. Chapters include long-term athletic development, considerations, speed training, power training, strength training, and program design. The Gain Go Grow Manual explores training the high-performance hockey player. Chapters include biomechanics of ice hockey, considerations for high performers, minimizing adaptational risks while upsizing gains, the Gain Go Grow model, and example microcycles. More information can be found at Amazon.com.
I had this blog that I had started in 2010 or 2011 because I've always enjoyed writing and the writing process, and I thought I had some interesting things to talk about, so I just started sharing them. Right, so I think it was around the time where I'd started reading things about learning out loud. I said, okay, let me stress test the things that I think. I'll put it out there, get some immediate feedback, and that can help sort of my growth and development as a thinker, methodologist, researcher, coach, whatever, right? So I thought it was important for me to start sharing my stuff more, because up until that point, and we're talking 15 years, Matt and I had been sharing our stuff, but it was within our own little network, right? When Matt mentioned earlier about our strength and conditioning practicum that we started in 2000 or 2001, and we had a group of people that we were sharing these things to, is what we called at the time the system. And we started writing on this, right? And part of it became the practicum, part of it became this this massive presentation that we were building over the course of time that at one point was, I don't know, Matt, 600 slides long or something, right? And I think between us, we had 1 million words that built up this quote unquote, this system. So when I started this blog, it always was with the thoughts of, all right, this could be a vehicle for Matt and myself to share some of the things that we had been speaking about over the course of the 20 years previously, or 15 or 20 years previous, and some of the things that we'd always been sharing, but a little bit more internally. So that's kind of the starting place for that. All right, and then, all right, what do we actually start this with? We know that there's some confusion around for most coaches, most of the time, on what really truly matters, right? Because this was the start of, the social age and, more people just getting on, and like that, as you said, there was much more noise than signal. And that kind of started in around that time, right? The mid O's to late O's, and then the 2010 and so on and so forth. So we found that growing and more people just getting confused about what truly mattered. So Matt and I said, all right, well, let's start writing about this, and we'll write a piece on it. And I think it ended up, I think we just wanted to just write a piece, and it was just going to be, all right, this was just going to be just a one-off thing. And then really quickly we felt like, okay, this is not enough. This is nowhere near enough. So let's turn this into a bit of a series. And it wasn't that, okay, we're going to write a 10-piece series or a 5-piece series or a 20-piece series. It's just, we kept writing. And I brought in other people as well. Brett came in to write something on culture. We, brought in Martin Bingerser to write something. We had this, my favorite part of the whole series was the three-way conversation between myself and Matt and Derek Evely. I think to this day, I think that is the best piece of information in this industry on that stuff. I just think it's freaking awesome. And then I'll tell you about the story around how that actually got developed a little later, Anthony. But that's from my memory anyway, Matt. That's kind of how it all started, right?
Oh. Yeah, I mean, yeah, roughly. I remember, being browbeated and texted, and where's your piece? And are you gonna write this, man? You're gonna write your piece, man? Like, for months. No, I'm just joking. There was a little bit of that, though. No, it's exactly it. I mean, it was, it was Stu's idea. It sort of was a Matt, fitting time for.
Can I interrupt you for a second? That what Matt just said there, Anthony, is essentially that is the entire kind of background of our entire relationship. It's me yelling at Matt to get something to me. Over and over and over again. Finally, he does.
Over and over.
And it's amazing, and it's great.
And then you get that.
Always me yelling at Matt. Always, yeah. And it has been for 20 years.
And then you produce a coach's guide to strength development. It was, literally that's what it took. No, I mean, Stu hit me at a good point, right? Because at this stage, and I think, maybe we've talked a little bit, Anthony, about this, but I went back to do a PhD late in the game. And it was after extensive time, working in the field. I was not young, but one thing anybody who does a PhD will find out, especially if you're going to be successful at it, is you got to know how to write, and you got to be able to write a lot, because that's all you got to do is write grants, write proposals, write papers, prepare, communicate, right. And so I was in this mode and remain in this mode to this day of obviously being academically oriented is a lot of writing and reading. And so, when Stu kind of started pushing the idea forward and we were talking about it, there was definitely some browbeating for me to get get a section back to him, whatever. But I was able to sit down and kind of immerse myself into it. And I think what, to Stu's point, as we were writing this, I can remember distinctly the problem we were trying to solve is a lot of coaches today don't know how to fit strength development into a cohesive training system. And so what we were seeing is that if you're just training for strength or hypertrophy, it's kind of easy. Move heavy loads. If you want to maximize hypertrophy, maximize the volume of work that you're doing and eat lots. And if you want to maximize strength, try to get some higher intensities to be able to. But when you're dealing with an athlete who's got 30 or 40 hours of other stuff they're doing in a week, or you're prepping for an Olympic Games, or you're dealing with an athlete, like we would have athletes that, it's like, it's not maximum strength that's driving this person's performance. It's other stuff, right? And we were starting to see that, the devil in the details for training for athletes requires much more precision and understanding about how this stuff fits in, where to focus, where to spend your time. And, because Stu and I, that was our bread and butter. I mean, I'm really proud to say on some level, and I'm also feel like an idiot for saying this on some level, that, when we were back in the O's and trying to do this stuff, our friend John Berardi his goal was to build $1 million business. And Stu's and my goal was not to build $1 million business. Our goal was to train athletes and get them to the Olympics and try to get them, as physically prepared and mentally prepared as we could. Now, one pursuit is amazing because you build a beautiful business worth millions of dollars and you get to retire when you're 45. And then the other business is a labor of love, right? And so Stu and I have always been in a labor of love with this business, and we were almost exclusive out of the business side so that we could learn more and just do the work and understand things for the purposes of what we were getting our passion from, which was helping athletes. So, when you start to amass this knowledge and then you put pen to paper after, 15, 20 years of doing this, and you start to try to tease out like, okay, so how does that stuff fit for an athlete though? That's, I think, where, Stu's and I and my expertise have always lied. And, when we produce that work, that's the problem we're trying to solve. Where does this fit? You've heard about this in the world on social media. How does it fit now to help this elite athlete get better? Right. So that's the whole gist behind it. And, it's funny because Stu and I have this and we have plans to do something with this. And it's
The book.
we're gonna evolve it. Yeah.
1,000+ pages, baby.
We're going to evolve it. Time is always the hard thing to find these days. When you're Stu's prepping his athletes for the Olympics. I love an academic job, but man, I'll tell you, September to April, it's full gas. I keep an open office door, so my students and people are coming by, and then on the weekends, I've got 3 kids, so I prioritize the best I can, being around. So it's hard to find time to do this, but I can tell you right now that Stu and I have got many conversations about evolving our blog post and to try to update it a bit and then put it in a format that really hopefully helps coaches out there who are trying to figure out how to piece this together for sport. Like, how do you do that? And I think that's something that unfortunately I think you just got to have the experience and you got to pass it on to be able to sort of get that foundation.
That blog post, several things just spurned from it, but a couple things just talking out loud here. We talk about Dunning-Kruger all the time, but I truly believe that within the profession, at some capacity, we all have it, like in different variations and different specialties. It opened my eyes up a ton. In terms of measures of backtracking my education. Stu, it led me to your recommended reading list, got into Karl Popper. I'm a huge Popper person because of it. You don't even know that, because of this blog. Got into some of your books on uncertainty, got in, Matt, to 21st, John Kiley's work. Like, this all stemmed from the blog. And to this day, like, well, let's go section by section because I don't want this to be a monologue. And you guys can add narrative if you'd like. I can just tell you a couple things that I learned from it. This is part 1 and 2, a strength coach's guide, a coach's guide to strength development, part 1 and 2. This was all on strength. Matt, you are a co-author here. Talked about force velocity, cross-sectional area, intermuscular coordination. And after reading this, to me, it hit a quote that Patrick Ward talked about. And he said, I don't look at exercises. I'm looking at what's the adaptation I want to chase? What's the method I want to use? And then last but not least, I'm going to choose that exercise. And that work, your work, after reading that, resonated with me. specifically, the deep science of muscle physiology and adaptation. So that was a big aha moment for me as a younger coach. I say a younger coach, guys, this is 10 years ago. So halfway through my strength and conditioning journey,
Yeah, totally. And it's, again, I think it's kind of fundamental, right? I mean, I think it was, we were so fortunate early on in our development to have people influence us towards trying to have a good foundation about why things work. I can remember a distinct conversation in my master's, and I was wanting to describe some stuff. And I remember talking to Walter Herzog about this, and he's like, really good science, you try to understand how it works, or why, or like what's the mechanism, like what's going on. And so, we always had a big rooting in physiology and anatomy and biomechanics, and that was always a base, right? Now that doesn't mean that you stop there, because that won't arm you very well for, as you say, converting that into a system where you train and coach. But you have that as your base, and I think that's a base that we are constantly turning back to classic texts. And I'll just make one comment as I let you kind of go throw the ball back to you guys on this one. But I am amazed when I say a name like and this is in Canada, I'll say a name like Charlie Francis, Verkhoshansky. I'll say names that, I think people probably still resonate with. And I'm just amazed sometimes. I'm like, how many people have heard of like whatever name? And it's like, I don't think I've ever heard of that person. And it's like, oh, and Stu and I used to go spend there back in the day before you had the internet. We would go to the library tower, 9th floor of the McKimmey Library Tower, to extract periodical.
I remember that
articles.
day, guys. I had hair.
Yes. Yeah. and the University of Calgary has the entire collection of Soviet sports science reviews. So you go back to the original papers from Matveyev, Verkhoshansky. They are in these Soviet sports science reviews where you can pull out articles on the effects of running in a pine forest on recovery, like thinking that you're like, wow, what were they doing over there? This is unreal. But this year, I actually had a student come up and say, I've never heard of Verkhoshansky. And I said, you know what you're going to do? All of these articles are in the archive. You're going to go find them, and you're going to use them for your final paper. And this student went out and actually dug out a copy of original Verkhoshansky work, where they have used the information, applied the information, and brought it into context to be like, I'm trying to periodize a program here for an elite basketball player who's coming back from an injury, and I need to integrate strength development into their plan to help promote better tendon adaptation so they can play on the court without jacking themselves up. And it was a periodization problem that Verkhoshansky solved in 1980 with how to integrate strength development with concentrated loads, was what you need to sort of promote tendon adaptation, but to fit that in to an overall program where you have to perform. So anyways, not to go on a rant there, but the fundamentals of the physiology, the science, I think are, there's so much there to be learned. So I'm glad you got something out of that. As I do always as well.
Yeah, I'm confused. I thought the sport performance industry started in 2000.
Yeah, I think it's amazing, Stu. We've talked about this. Like it's more and more. It's getting shorter and shorter, right? So the younger you are, it's like it starts like 2020 or something like that, right? It's really very narrow windows of information because that's the world we live in, and so that's one way that Stu and I think we can bolster the blog post, which will be converted to PDF, is to really start to fill in the gaps. So you can see the history of it a little bit. So it's I think it's an important thing. It's a legacy.
Can I zoom out a little bit, Anthony? Do you mind?
Of course, yeah, of course.
Yeah. It's because one thing that we haven't said explicitly here, and Matt hasn't said it explicitly, which I think is probably maybe what he's best known for, is kind of his 3-step process. And that, for me, the first step of that process is the most important one, and which is driving much of our conversation here today, as well as driving, what our book is and what our project is together. And that's trying to figure out what matters. And by the way, the process is what matters, measure what matters, and change what matters, right? And we talked about that a lot in this blog series. But that, that first sort of two articles within that was number one is this stuff matters. This is what you should be paying attention to. Yeah, there's a lot of other stuff, as you said. There's a lot of noise out there. What is the signal that you really need to pay attention to? It's like especially now, we're inundated with information like never before, right? And most people are, because of all this noise, are kind of confused. And I get it. Like that's why it was so much easier for us, because there wasn't access to all of this information. You just had this. And most of the time, this was good. So it was easier for us to determine what matters. It's impossible now. And I feel like that is one of the roles of kind of more experienced people within the field, is almost as a knowledge broker, right? That kind of navigate this big flood of information. And I feel like this role has become almost indispensable now, right? I think it's the most important thing, is to point people towards the things that they should be paying attention to. And I feel like Matt specifically has done a better job of this than almost anybody. And that's one thing that I really appreciate from him. And it just gives a kind of a model of how we should be going about our business. First, try to figure out what matters. Once you think what matters, try to find a way where you can accurately measure that. And then once you measure that, determine how you can go about the process of changing the things that you want to change within that. And that's just iterative, right? We just continue going around that over and over and over again. But I feel like that is the most important thing that comes out from all of this. I think it's the most important thing that I feel like people get from that blog series, is this is the stuff that matters. Stop wasting your time on all this stupidness. And honestly, the entire industry is built upon that now. Stupidness, everything. Like I don't go on Twitter anymore at all. I spend 10 minutes a week on Twitter, but every time I go on there, I'm reminded of it. Like, are you kidding me? Are you guys really talking about this? Stop. Like, what are you doing this for? Are you actually interested in doing what you're saying you want to be doing, which is working in the sport performance industry because of X? And ideally, X is because you're trying to learn as much as you can about human performance and maybe help your athletes or help the athletes that you're working with, improve their health and improve their performance, so on and so forth. If you're interested in doing that, stop all this other stupidness, honestly, and try to figure out what matters and focus on that. And I feel like that's always been what, and I appreciate Matt so much to this day, is he put, as I said, he put words to what I've been thinking about for many, many years. And it seems really, really simple, but still most people ignore it. Like, figure out first what matters, and then just focus on that and just continue from there. And I feel like if you don't get number one, like step number one right, everything you do thereafter is wrong.
I would argue that a lot right now is just measuring. Not even don't even answer what's important or what matters a lot. I could be wrong. This is what I see in social media, just the technology and the measures and the metrics without any idea for the problem at hand or how you're going to change it. If once you read those numbers,
Yeah, it's both. It's ignoring the first one because the second one and the third one are sexier. Well, let me just try and change some stuff. Oh, look, I changed some stuff. The clean went up. Great. Perfect. And I'm getting all this technology so I can measure all these things. Great. You haven't asked the primary question yet, the foundational question. Does it matter? We have to start there. So that's kind of, that was the basis, the genesis of much of what we were writing with this blog series, as well as what our conversations are about now, and what this book that we've been writing for, Matt, how long? Like, we've been talking about this book for 15 years. We might get it done in 15 more years, Anthony, hopefully. And if we do, you'll be the first one to get a copy.
That's what I was going to say. Come on, I got to get a copy of this place.
But it starts with that, right? It's identifying the things that matter. Like, what is the one big thing? What is the one sentence axiom of the thing that matters? And then we build it from there.
Picking up on that, I think that's profound. And I think I would agree with you, Stu, at least from my narrative and my lens and my biases. I see that, at least with social media, it seems like everyone's just measuring and showing off fancy technology without answering a fundamental question. maybe it's more show than tell, maybe not. I've also been opened up to, for me personally, I've had Patrick Ward on the podcast several times, and he's really educated me and backtracked me and in a healthy way, humbled me in a good way. That's how I learn, right? Hey, Anthony, you got to think more critically before you measure X, Y, Z. And so this is all good. The other thing that really came out of this blog post, piggybacking on that first, completely changed the loading scheme. Matt, your rep and set schemes based on the fundamentals, what we're looking for. Stu, the way you showed, the way Dan, it literally led to what I call that gain, go, growth, that 3-day rollover, this idea of complementary training. Like, this was foundational for me. Now, I can speak now, we've had a small business since 2005, so going on 20 years, but my undergrad was in business. It was never an exercise science. These readings at the time, even after getting a master's degree in exercise science, really to this day have shaped the way I think and the way I program. So again, not to beat a dead horse. The other thing I want to hit on, this part 3, culture. Brett Bartholomew, again, he was a guest in terms and measures of writing that piece. Massively important. A couple of things I took out of this one. I was always the young guy that thought, I got put in my place once in a good way, and it was a quote that was stated from me by a coach in the National Hockey League. He said, "Anthony, coaching's a lot like parenting. At a young age, a directive approach may be warranted. At an older age, a cooperative approach you're not going to treat your kid at 18 the way you did when he was 4 years old." But this idea of creating culture, these were things that, really to this day, essentially have had profound impacts on the way I coach on a daily basis. Even body language, coaching in front as opposed to the side, small things that have had profound impacts on the way I interact with people.
Yeah, it's, I'm sure you have interns there when we're at your business, Anthony, but we have interns, 3 to 4 interns 3 times a year. So every year we've got somewhere between sort of 9 and 15-ish interns. We've run this internship program now for a decade. And that is the thing, I think, the communication piece, the ability and the comfort of just standing in front of people and knowing what to do and how to handle themselves and how to communicate. It's the one thing I feel, and I'd be interested in you guys' thoughts on this as well, that I feel has decreased. The quality in that has decreased over the course of the last couple of decades. It's the first thing that you'll do on the first day, because every intern coach is nervous, they will stand there with their hands in their pockets. Every single, so and right away. So I have few rules, but one is you do not coach with your hands in your pockets. You also don't cross your arms. You also don't sit down. But people don't think about this. They're not taught these things. Right? These are important things. You are a piece of this health and performance system. You're a component part of it. Your interaction with all of the rest of these component parts is important, unless you're outside of it. If you're outside of it, cool, you can do what you want. If you're outside the other side of the fence and you're sitting in the stands, feel free to put your hands in your pockets. But if you are out there with the athletes, with the other coaches, doing things, then you have to understand your impact as a component part within this big health and performance system. And I feel like, we don't talk about that enough. It's one thing that Matt and I didn't necessarily use much of this terminology when we were writing this back in sort of the teens there, but it was it's everything around that, right? It's here is what is the health and performance system. Here are all the component parts of the system, and here is how all of these component parts interact and interrelate to serve this common purpose of ideally serving our athletes and our coaches and our teams in a better way. And I feel still like that's not communicated enough, not talked about enough in an explicit way.
The only way you get better at this stuff is you've gotta be having some sort of mirror or openness to the feedback so that you can improve. I can tell you 2 stories right now, top of my head, where I completely freaking blew it as a young starting out strength coach. And in both cases, I was given direct feedback from the person that I had dropped the ball. And so now I'm talking 25 years later, it sticks, right? Number one, I got my first job working with a group of figure skaters about an hour, probably 45 minutes away from Calgary. And I didn't even own a car. And I got this gig and I did it for free. It was, to be honest with you, the person who gave it to me, I think, for like, hey, I don't want to do this. So you do it. I had to buy an $800 Volkswagen Rabbit that barely could stay on the road. And I can remember one day the weather was so bad. I turned around and I came back because I didn't think like this thing wouldn't steer. I'm like, I'm gonna have an accident. And I remember getting kind of called in the next day and he's like, hey, you didn't show up for that session. Obviously I couldn't text anybody. I couldn't, like, it was just not that time. Right. And, this, like, what you just did reflects bad on me. And I was like, I wanted to go for excuses. I wanted to explain myself. But it was like, you know what? You're right. Like, that's all, right? Reflects badly on you. I get it. Feedback taken, point taken. I won't let that happen again. And I can remember another situation where, and I'm not going to go into too much detail here because, again, I was a young coach making mistakes. And this time I'm like, literally, this is before Stu and I've met. And I've got my first group of athletes. It's actually non-strength and conditioning. I'm coaching in another sport. And I'm in like my second last year of my undergrad. And so it was a Saturday morning race. And I'd gone out the night before with friends and I drank. And I had a good time. And I rolled in late and I slept. And I woke up at 9 and I rolled into coach. And it was an older athlete because I had a bunch of athletes in this group. And it wasn't strength and conditioning, but it was an older athlete who, business person, they'd actually made their millions and they were here to like become a better athlete in this sport that I was coaching. And, super nice person, like really nice person. This guy's name was Boyd. And, Boyd was the nicest guy on the planet. And he came up after, he said, hey, you smell like booze. And I was like, oh, shit. That's all I needed. I never made that. And when I got opportunities thereafter to work with Olympic athletes and pro athletes and like be in better scenarios where I was sort of doing bigger things, that was so instrumental in shaping my own personal commitment to personal excellence and leadership in those moments, right? And so why I'm bringing these stories up is that sometimes today we live in a world where if you get direct feedback, it feels like a personal attack. It feels like, you've affected me emotionally. I feel like I've been potentially, not abused, but like in our verbiage today, it could feel like attacked and like diminished. And I can't tell you if you can open yourself up to the possibility that the person criticizing you probably was in the same position themselves at some point. And they probably look back now and say, thank God Boyd pulled me out when I was 24 and acknowledged that I'm not on my A game this morning, called me out on it in a very nice way, albeit, right? I would not have learned that lesson. And so as we just sort of like, think about that third component about like your own personal leadership, you are going to make mistakes and you are going to do things wrong, like put your hands in a pocket or come across the wrong way. And you may continue, like, this is a part of being human. So I can't stress how important it is to learn those lessons, because if you make the wrong mistake with the wrong person, that could be the end of it. Like, that's when they're like, we got to get rid of this guy. So it's a really crucial point to have that safe to fail environment where someone like Stu is giving you the feedback. They're not going to can you on the first day because you put your hands in your pocket, but you're going to get the feedback and you embrace it and develop with it.
If he has bad coffee, though, we might can him the first day, though. No?
Bad coffee. Maybe that's a deal breaker.
No, Matt, that's outstanding advice. I don't know. I tend to side with you when it comes to this day and age with that. I think that I look back now at the most profound coaches had the biggest impact on my career, and they had discipline that was love. It wasn't out of spite. It wasn't out of threat, but I used it as growth, as fertilizer. And conversely, I also found that coaches who didn't say anything, really, not that they didn't care, but they didn't have that impact on me,
Mhm.
So
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's a tricky game these days about giving feedback and being able to do it in a way that it lands well. I think it's maybe 30 years ago, feedback was expected, and it, you got what you got. Maybe it was nice, probably wasn't.
Maddie, do you
But
remember that? I think this was '05 or '06, and myself and you were called in to have a conversation, a meeting with Finn Halverson.
yeah,
Do you remember that? So this
I
is
do.
this is '05 and '06, and Matt and I are at this point we've been coaching for a while. We're pretty experienced. We're quite respected in the industry and within the facility and where we were. And we were called into have this meeting with Finn, who is the performance director with Speed Skating Canada. And something happened, buddy, where we ended up being like a minute late, 90 seconds late. And he tell I don't remember the story he told, but he's telling this story. And Matt and I are sitting there, in front of his desk, and he tells a story for about 5 minutes. And Matt and I are just sort of chuckling at the story. And they just hammered us with this last sentence in this story that just meant, don't ever be late for a meeting with me ever again. Don't waste my time. Do not waste my time.
Yeah, it was something along the lines, if Bob's 60 seconds late and Sally's 60 seconds late and Anthony's 60 seconds late and everyone's just 60 seconds late. It was something to the effect of, you just wasted everybody's time, because that adds up. That's hours of time of people just being late. It was, yeah, it was like another, yeah, I know. It's, we all have those moments of being corrected by others. And the instinct is definitely to probably want to, like, sometimes tell someone to go F themselves. But just stay in it for a second and have the wherewithal to say, yeah, touche, good point, you're right, and take it. Like, that to me is a really important skill in coaching. Sorry, Anthony, I'm only saying this because I think it's important, so I'm not
take
trying to
time.
belabor
No.
stories.
Oh.
But here's another example, and I won't use names. Olympic level athlete, like top of the top, right? And I've been working with them for years. And we've just finished the Olympics, and this athlete has won the gold medal. It's been historic. It was a great race. It was unreal. And we're debriefing after the season. And athlete comes in, and very well respected Canadian athlete. And they say something like, if this is going to work, I need more from you. As in, we're prepping now for 2010. If this is going to work, I need more from you. And
Wow.
I said, you got it. Like, you got it. I mean, I had all kinds of reasons and excuses and things I could have said and done and tried to massage it and like make it, well, hold on a second. Do you know? No, just there's no point. There's no point. Just take it in, absorb it, reflect on it, understand the importance of being present, and you need to move forward and give this person more. That's it. And so, I'm just giving these examples because I think maybe coaches who are listening to this may feel like, why am I always the one who's being told that I'm not good, or whatever the scenario. But I want people to know that we all go through this, and it's part of growth. So don't take it personally. Try not to dwell on it. Please don't get angry about it. Don't get vindictive about it. Don't be like, I'm going to tuck that comment away, and in 5 years, I'm going to torch this person the second I can because I can't stand him. Like, that happens way more than it should right now, where I see that kernel of like, I am not owning this for a second, and I am going to burn this person the moment I can. Like, that is our toxic world that we live in today. And thankfully, I've got people around me in my world, for the most part, that don't go that way. But just please, if you're thinking about it, getting feedback, try to take it in and try to just own it and use it for your own growth. Like, that's just it's a crucial skill.
Unbelievable. And thanks for sharing and expanding. Guys, I want to respect your time. I want to go briefly over some stuff. Then I want to have some touches on the book. I want to ask you guys more about it. Periodization. Oh, unbelievable. The history, is history a good predictor of the future? So many takeaways. The map is not the terrain. Taylorism. Oh my God. I read Frederick Taylor's book because of this, guys. I looked at, is history a good predictor of the future? I got massively into complex systems, reading. Fergus Connolly's my best Irish buddy, man. Fergus and I talk weekly about these things and these nuances. Quick question for you, Matt. I know this is probably, you could go on about it because you teach periodization. When I look at it, right, periodization, I look at any kind of model as assumptions of experts used to make predictions, right? And this is just my brain, right? So I always want to know, what are the assumptions? Like, what are the assumptions of periodization? It doesn't mean we don't plan. It doesn't mean we don't have a plan. We do, I do. But for me, I look at after reading the Frederick Taylor book, those same assumptions I see and John Kiley wrote about, to me, are the same assumptions in things like long-term athletic development, are things, and these assumptions where we're confusing complex with complicated. And again, it doesn't mean we don't plan. Or periodize rather. My big takeaway was strive to understand those assumptions, measure and manage, and then obviously, if there are issues, hyper focus on those issues and correct them over time by measuring and managing.
And the other thing I'll just say briefly is it's a real world experiment. Stu and I were presenting to Hydro, the rowing company. This is maybe 3 months ago. And, a question was asked from the audience, which, by the way, what a great crew they are over there. No pun intended. But the question gets asked. It's like, hey, what should I do about something? And, I'm sitting there, I'm like, oh God, what's the answer? Do I tell them they should do the 5 sets of 90 seconds with 180 seconds rest, or should it be 6? And I'm detailed. Anyways, wrong answer. Stu jumps in and says, well, there's only one way to figure that out. You just got to do it and see what happens. Like, how does anybody know? Like, there's no way to know, right? There's no way to know with periodization and how we do all this stuff, if it's working for the person you have in front of you, unless you are doing a real world experiment of sorts where you have a training hypothesis and a plan that's built on these assumptions. And you've got that feedback loop, which is coming back to inform, am I getting closer to dialing in that radio station, or am I way off target? And that to me is the process. It's like, okay, we got it. Like, you have to have that tuning process in any program, which is why periodization, it probably only fails you when you start to get extremely rigid and logical with a model that you can't deviate from. But that's that part that I think, when we talk about feedbacking on periodization, it's what allows us to have a better sense of what's going to work at the right time for the right person, if that makes any sense.
Like, we have to, and you said this earlier, Anthony, people don't understand the difference between a complex system and a complicated system. And it's really, really important that they do, right? And it's all about the level of the causation, your understanding of cause and effect. In a complex system, you understand causation in hindsight only. So what does that mean? That means that we don't really know what we're going to get out on the other end until we get to the other end. So what does that mean from a training perspective and a programming perspective? Is we just run these experiments, as Matt said. But it's important that it's not just any experiment. These are, as you said earlier, safe to fail experiments. You just probe this complex system with these safe to fail experiments. And we run these experiments and we see what happens in the back end. And we learn a bit more about the complex system. We run another safe to fail experiment and so on and so forth. So it's really, it goes back to kind of understanding what matters. Well, what matters is the type of system that you are dealing with. And if you don't know that, then that's problematic.
What is an experiment? This idea of periodizing the wrong variable, the independent variable as opposed to the dependent variable. This stuff is hugely important to everybody, including seasoned coaches sometimes, that I feel. So that was amazing in it. And then Matt, again, I want to respect guys' time. I want to chat about the book, but I love this awareness and data collection. I know Martin Bissinger, measure what matters, measure what you can capture, measure what you will use, minimize the variables, don't overreact. Matt, you are a measurement professional. You're teaching, what do you see right now as massive not concerns, but issues pertaining to this huge onset of the technology boom in sports science?
Context. You don't have context with just a technology and an outcome measure. And you can't have context without people using the information, talking about the information, working off the information, understanding what's happening in the context of what this is. And the more I often use this example when I'm talking about the power of having a strength lab. It's not to get the eccentric braking force. It's when Stu and me and you and the therapist can go in and we can be collaborating on a problem and using the information together to better understand what we think that training hypothesis should be. And then we talk about it some more and we distill it down and we say, here's our plan. We say, well, let's give it a go. There's only one way to know here is we have to run the experiment and see what happens. Do we shift the thing? Did we change the thing? Did we change the thing that matters? Do we see that? And, I'll be honest with you, that context is what any good use of data is going to absolutely depend upon. Because without it, it doesn't help much. I think that's where, if we can create the foundation for people to be able to have collaboration, which means I understand where you're coming from. I'm not going to feel personally attacked if you tell me my idea is stupid. I often preface things like, hey, I'm not holding your feet to the fire on this, Stu. Here's what I think, and you tell me if it's a bad idea. I test it. I'm already testing the idea, Yeah, actually, no, I don't, or I do. Okay. We're working together. And that's where, the data side of it to me is and the technology is a piece of that complex system and process. So yeah, I could sum it up with that one word answer is the missing piece and the key is context. Got to build context.
Excellent. Final pivot, guys. We're past on time. The book. What the heck's the book name going to be, guys? What are we talking here? How many pages, Stu? Where are we at here in the publication process, man? I got some marketing to do on this podcast.
Well, it's our working title is What Matters.
Love it.
And there'll be a subtitle, and that'll probably end up being the title with a subtitle. But it's that. It's just our exploration into what matters for health and performance in high performance sport, using much of the material that we did write about within this blog series, but also expanding upon many other things. And that blog series just stopped because we just both got super busy. It was going to keep on going forever. We stopped at 10. And I left it up on the site for a while, and then I closed down the McMillan Speed blog maybe 3 years ago now. So I don't think people, I don't know, maybe it still exists somewhere in some other site, but it's no longer, or no one's able to find it online anymore. I don't think, at least not on the McMillan Speed blog. Because it just, I don't know, it was annoying for me that it was still there. I was getting a ton of questions about it, but I was also probably from that time, I think it was time for, as soon as I took it down, then that was the impetus for me and Matt to actually, all right, let's get off our asses and actually do this thing we've been talking about for many, many years, rather than just continue to talk about it. And the first step in that was take it down so it doesn't exist in it there anymore. And there was some of those posts have been read over 100,000 times. I mean, it was pretty well read, and as you said, I think it was quite impactful for many. So our goal now is just to continue that process. As Matt said, it's hard for both of us. Both of us run our own companies. Both of us are super busy. We have a scheduled call that we jump on every second Friday, and that we're continuing to move this forward. When? I don't know. Hopefully April 19th, 2025, we can be back on this podcast talking about the book.
That would be amazing.
But I don't know. I'm not super confident about that.
Guys, Matt, let me start with you. Where can we find more about you? Can you give everyone your social contact, etc.?
Yeah, absolutely. My social is Jordan Strength. So that's on Instagram and Twitter or X. I also have a website, jordanstrength.com, and we're actually rebranding our online courses into more of a cohesive system of levels. It's the same content, but we've expanded it and we've added some new material in. But we are sort of appealing to the call from our customers that they want to have more cohesion, more access to me and some mentorship and be able to understand things. So we are adding a new level in, and we're also doing some more in-person stuff that will hopefully address that need. And hopefully we'll have that up and running in the near future, like in the next 3 or 4 weeks. But you can find that at my website at jordanstrength.com.
Outstanding. Stu.
In the space that exists between sort of training and science, especially in the strength and conditioning world, Matt's stuff, and he won't tell you this himself, but Matt's stuff is far and away the best on the planet. It's not close. So if you're a strength and conditioning coach that is really interested in the why behind the things that you do, like just get on there, get on Jordan's Strength and take some of his work. Like really, really do. I can't recommend Matt's work enough. I mean, it's I've never seen anything like it. Our stuff is available at altis.world. We've got a bunch of online and in-person education things that people can partake in if they're interested in. My social on Instagram is fingermash, FINGER mash. And on Twitter, Stu McMillan 1. I don't spend a lot of time on Twitter anymore. I just basically retweet the ALTIS stuff. But I spend more time on Instagram because I think we can provide a little bit more context. But most of our long form stuff is on at altis.world, in which we have 3 weekly newsletters that I write at least 2 of them each week. So that's where I still continue to write if people are looking for that. And then just look for hopefully within a few months here, the re-emergence of the McMillan Jordan blog, so we can start actually sharing some of our stuff.
That will be outstanding. Our guests today have been Dr. Matt Jordan and Stu McMillan. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, buddy. Appreciate it.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure. Thanks, guys.